Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about change management. And there is so much that we've learned this semester, specific to organizational behavior, specific to leadership. Change management is kind of integral to a lot of what we've learned. When we talk about decision making entails change management. When we talk about getting groups to become teams, that entails change management. When we talk about taking a vision and creating a strategy and executing on that strategy, that is change management. When we talk about trying to understand our own emotions and the emotions of others so that we can manage, connect, and influence, that entails change management. So much of what we've learned this semester all interrelates. And change management is an important part of that. And we're going to take some time today to review some of the common core principles of change management, to include John Kotter's change management model. And we'll spend some time on that. We'll also review a case study on change management. We're going to look at the recent history of General Electric and how they had changed recently CEOs and how many of those CEOs have failed and perhaps why they have failed. We'll go through that as well. So let's begin. First of all, we always want to review our charter. And our charter, last week we talked about emotional intelligence. And remember the key with emotional intelligence. We had sort of the conflict between Dan Goleman and Adam Grant. Goleman saying EQ, emotional intelligence, is absolutely critical to leadership. You should hire for that. Adam Grant saying, EQ is important, but so is CA, cognitive ability. And you should really hire for that. And you can weigh both arguments, and there's validity to both sides. I think at the end of the day, both are important, and you have to balance EQ and CA. And again, the dynamic of manage, connect, and influence is important. Manage your emotions, manage the emotions of others. That's going to help you connect to them. That's going to help you influence them. Of course, this week is on change management, and next week should be a discussion on communication and motivation. As always, we like to review our important dynamics, and we have the dynamics that we've taken a look at every week and we've built upon. We have the dynamic of vision, strategy, and execution. You start with a very broad vision. From that vision, you develop strategies, and all of that is meaningless unless you can execute on that. And what's critical about this dynamic now is when we talk about change, moving from strategy to execution is change. Also, we have the four functions of management: planning, organizing, directing, and controlling. We have the four resources that we manage, 6 concepts of a competitive advantage, always influencing where we are and where we have to go. The understanding that groups are not teams, that groups will go through various stages and will have to go through various stages to become a team. And a group is not a team unless they are performing. And we also had learned about the organizational structure, in that an organizational structure, or the org chart, is all about power. And again, manage, connect, and influence. Manage our emotions, manage the emotions of others. That's going to help us to connect, and that's going to help us to influence others. But this topic is all about change. And right here, going back to vision, strategy, and execution, taking that strategy, having to execute on the strategic intent, the strategic items, that involves change. And that is so critical. And that's why we're going to talk about it. So let's first of all understand what is change. We'll take a look at some keys to change and then how we will successfully implement change. What is change? Change is basically taking an organizational unit or an organization from a current state to a more desirable state. Okay? And the movement from the current state to the desirable state, right in here, that is change. So change, as you'll see, change is the process of moving from a current state to a different and more desirable state. That means you have to really understand your current state. That means you really also have to understand where do you want to go? What is the desirable state? And change is how do you get there? So the keys to change is an understanding that those who do not adapt to change in timely ways will fail. I can go back in my 35 years in senior leadership positions, and I can point to a lot of folks that I've worked with at other senior leadership positions or other management positions and say, you know, they really failed in terms of communication. Or maybe they failed in terms of not executing on strategic plans. Or maybe they failed and they didn't develop folks. Or maybe they failed in controlling their own emotional intelligence. At the end of the day, I can say they failed when it came to change. And that is key. Keep in mind, everything now happens so fast. The days of a 5-year planning cycle are gone. Disruption is the key. Chaos in the marketplace is the key. And that means you need to really adapt and adapt quickly. And this is really key. Those who anticipate change, plan for it, and thereby embrace it, they will succeed. So a successful leader is one who plans for change, anticipates it, plans for it, and embraces it, and they will succeed. Very similar to decision making and looking at some of the decision making models where you can make a decision, but you also want to, if things don't go well, I need to anticipate some problems happening. And if those problems occur, how do I plan to resolve them? So that's all part of the decision-making process, but it's also a key to change. And to successfully implement change, there's 4 major areas that you really want to look at. And when we take a look at Kotter's 8-step model, Kotter sort of breaks his steps down into these 4 models. And you're going to see a typo. I made a typo. So much for spell check. To successfully implement change, the leader has to possess skills to persuade and convince. Very, very important. That goes back to interpersonal communication skills. That goes back to emotional intelligence, EQ, understanding my feelings at the time, the feelings of others. So you have to persuade and convince. You have to market the change. So if you're an operational manager, if you manage in human resources, or if you're a CFO, you're implementing a change, you got to sort of take that hat off, take that HR hat off, or that accounting CFO hat off, and put on the marketing hat. Next, you need to identify gaps between the now and the future, the current and the desired state. And this gets back to our model here. This is where we currently are. This is where we want to go. How do we get there? So that means you need to identify what are the gaps. Maybe gaps in our processes, gaps in our automated systems, gaps in our people. Maybe our folks do not have the knowledge or skills required to take the next step. And that sometimes happens, particularly if you are expanding into a new business. Or I could go back to my early career with Kemper, where we are bringing automation on, and dealing with individuals who may have no understanding of a computer, they have no understanding of a keyboard, and working with them. So maybe sometimes when you identify those gaps, that can lead to training. Sometimes it can lead to just bringing in new talent. Then you have to create an actionable vision, and you have to have measurable outcomes. It's no different than any other strategic intent. Here's the vision that I have. Here's my strategic intent, the action items, and how do I know I'm going to be successful at the end of the day? Here are the measurable outcomes. Here are the targets that I want to hit. And what's important with those measurable outcomes is you want to, along the way, show others, as part of your marketing scheme, if you will, that you are successful in change. And you show your success because you say, here is the target that we wanted to hit, and we hit it, or we came close, or maybe we exceeded it. So folks like to see scores, and measurable outcomes help in that respect. And then, of course, very important, you have to counter resistance, because humans are going to resist. And that's where persuasion and the ability to convince is very, very critical. Now, when we talk about resistance, you'll see the quote at the top of the page, "Nothing is so painful to the human mind as a great and sudden change." We like structure. We like going through the same routines when we wake up in the morning. We usually take the same route to work, the same route from work back home. We like structure. And humans like structure, therefore, we will resist anything that is looking to change that structure. And of course, that's change. And here is where resistance occurs. People will fear the change. People will take a look at their vested interests. People are going to have certain perceptions of a situation. There's going to always be a lack of trust in those change agents. There's going to be misunderstanding, and there's going to be the impact of limited resources. These are your resistors. As a change agent, as a leader, you want to minimize all of these. You want to sort of tell individuals, don't be afraid of the change. We will provide you with training, with education. We'll help you get through it. Vested interests. I know you have a vested interest in the current job that you're doing, in many of the processes. You will have a new vested interest in the new processes that we're implementing. Perceptions of the situation. Why do we have to change? Why is it necessary? Let me explain why. Here's our current state. Here's where we need to go. That new process, that new system will bridge that and get us there. You'll also begin to see a lack of trust. Individuals will begin to express a lack of trust in you as the leader. And this will be your opportunity to sit down with individuals, either in groups and teams or individually, and say, hey, you need to trust in me. You need to trust in what I say. You need to trust in how we're going to implement this. If you've done a good job as a leader and you've built trust throughout, you should have no problem. But even if you think you're not going to have a problem because you have a good relationship with your folks, think again. When there's change about and you're going after the nice structure that individuals are in, there's going to be a lack of trust. There'll be misunderstanding along the way. You'll always want to basically correct the misunderstandings through effective communication. And there's always going to be the constraint of limited resources. And that especially happens when you're changing processes. Hey, I still have to do my work, and I can only do my work with this process, what I know, but you are also training me to do new stuff and so forth. There's only 24 hours in the day. Again, through planning and communication, you'll try to work around the resistor of limited resources. So anytime you are implementing change as a leader, here are your 6 resistors, and you'll try to attack those resistors in your implementation plan. And you'll see that good leaders always counter resistance through education and training, through participation, bringing people into the process, and through negotiation. There are times when you're going to have to negotiate with individuals or groups when you are implementing change. So dealing with the resistors is important. When you start off with your vision for the change and your strategies for the change, don't be so much the tactician in that, we need to implement it. I need to have a new procedural manual. We need to modify our automated systems. That's all well and good, but you need to build into your strategic intent and your strategies the elements of education, participation, and negotiation. And we'll see this when we look at Kotter's model. A basic change process for the leader involves these 4 items. Marketing. And we talked about that when we talked about persuasion and convincing individuals. You will need to promote the reason and benefits of the change. That's going to help people to understand why we need to go from the current state to the desirable state. We already talked about resistance. The key to resistance, and you'll see it here, is to make resistance a stimulus for dialogue and more alternatives. You never want to look down upon an individual who is resisting. You never want to challenge them in an argumentative way. Instead, you want to try to understand the resistance and use it as a stimulus for productive dialogue. Trying to get an individual to persuade them to go from here to here is always difficult because many individuals will dig their heels in. So you have to go about it in a very empathetic way and in a very cautious way. And it's using phrases like, I understand. Tell me more about your position so I can better understand it. And then you just continue to have a productive dialogue. Or then you will explain your position and say, explain to me, tell me why you think it's not going to work so I can understand your position. Forward thought is also very critical. This is the leader providing a vision of what things will look like, and here you want to highlight core principles and values. If you are a principled leader, if you are a leader who has values and you've communicated those values, you live by them, you walk the talk, you want to bring those principles and those values into the change process. And you want to bring them into your forward thinking because, you're changing. You're also changing the climate of the organization, the ecosystem, right? And again, forward thinking means if I change it, what will I get to? The desirable state. But what problems will the desirable state have? Because you'll never reach perfection. You're moving from that to that desirable state because you have issues with the current state. You're going to have issues with the desirable state, okay? So forward thinking will help you with that and always bring your principles and your values along and show that to those folks in your team. And then you have the 3 basics of change. Again, we'll see this with Kotter. You have unfreezing, changing, and refreezing. Unfreezing is when you help others to see that the change is needed because the current state is not where you need to be. Changing is the next general step, and that is making the actual change. helping others to let go of the old ways and develop new ones, new processes. Okay? And that's going to take time. And that's where you are really dealing with the resistors. And then refreezing. This is when you've made the change, you've implemented it, things are chugging along. You're not always going to be at the desirable state, but eventually you'll get there and you refreeze. And refreezing is you reinforce the new methods, the new ways and behaviors, and you stabilize the change. So always remember the change process, even in Kotter's model, is unfreezing, making the change, refreezing. Some theorists will call it unfreezing or removing the anchor, making the change, and then re-anchoring. Two things that you have to always keep in mind with the basic change process is determining the pace of the change and ensuring integration. Pace of the change is very important. And depending on the type of change, your ecosystem, where you fall in the organizational structure, you may not have too much of a choice on the pace. But you need to understand that the pace has to be suitable. It has to be suitable for the environment, for what you're trying to accomplish. If it's too slow, the change may never occur. You'll chug along, you've unfreezed things, you're changing, but you never get to the point where you refreeze. If you go too fast, you'll get through the change, but you're going to miss things along the way, and you'll never hit the desirable state. So somewhere between too fast and too slow is the right pace, but you may not have too much of a choice in the matter, again, depending on the ecosystem and where you are in the organizational structure. But clearly think about the pace, and that means you got to take into consideration the folks that are involved in the pace, their skills, knowledge, and abilities, okay? And you'll see a fact, and this came from a recent study, 69% of organizations that quickly implement change are more likely to complete their strategic objectives. So that's telling us move quickly, get on with it. And if you get on with it, stick with it, and get through the unfreezing, change, and refreezing. And then something that always surprises me with leaders is some leaders will forget to ensure integration. I have implemented in my experience 3 times, maybe 4, changes to an HRIS, going from one HRIS to another. And at least on the second, third, and fourth times, I got a feel and a great appreciation for integration. An HRIS, which is Human Resource Information System, integrates the HR side of employment, the payroll side of employment, the benefit side of employment, recruitment as well. All of those systems have to be integrated. And then a lot of that data goes into accounting systems and sometimes even inventory-based systems. So in an organization, all of the systems need to be integrated. So as you see here, everything in an organization is connected. Processes and systems in one area impact on others, and leaders must plan for any and all integrations and impacts. Even in the days prior to automated systems, when a leader would change manual processes, if I changed manual processes in one department, it's going to impact manual processes of those departments that perhaps my department serviced. So you need to think through all of the integrations as part of the change process. Now, Kotter's 8-step change model is fairly simple and fairly logical. And it amazes me that no one really came up with the model until Cotter did, fairly recently too. When you look at Cotter's change model in front of you, you're going to see three basic areas: create climate for change, engage the organization, implement and sustain change. And it gets back to the unfreezing, change, refreezing. And you'll see within the first two sections there are 3 steps, and within the last section there are 2 steps. The first, you'll see under Create Climate for Change, is to establish a sense of urgency. Establishing a sense of urgency is all about making employees aware of the need to change. It's all about saying, this is what we're doing. You may be fine with it. I may be fine with it. Others may be fine with it. I think we can do better. And this is where we need to go. So I'm making you aware of the need for change. It has to be open and honest and productive dialogue. And more importantly, it has to provide evidence. I remember going from one automated system to another automated system. In this automated system, our error ratio was, I thought, too high. Under a new automated system that had more bells and whistles, more checks and balances, error ratios would go down. So I would use evidence in our current state that our error rate perhaps is too high to get folks to understand, having a sense of urgency that we need to make the change. The second step in the first section is part of the marketing scheme, and that's to form a powerful coalition. Forming a powerful coalition is taking individuals from all areas in your unit, and perhaps even individuals outside of your unit, to help you lead and drive the change. You make them part of your planning process. You make them part of creating measurable outcomes. And that's important because you're going to, by doing that, you're going to be dealing with resistance. So already that powerful coalition is bringing resistance to you, and bringing resistance to you early on. And that's going to help you to overcome the resistance. It's also going to give you folks that you can rely upon and try to get some suggestions from. And you're also going to use those folks to, and hopefully, you need to bring naysayers into that powerful coalition, because you want those naysayers to poke holes in what you're trying to do. By having folks poke holes in what you're trying to do, you'll be better at doing it. But here's a marketing aspect of the powerful coalition. You bring all these folks into the process up front. You have them help you along the way. They become ambassadors for your change if you do it well. They help you promote and sell and market the change. So before Cotter, leaders would simply go about the change on their own, perhaps with other supervisors or managers. Cotter tells us to bring others into the change process as a powerful coalition to help us do a better job at the change process, but more importantly, to help us market and sell the change. The third step is using that powerful coalition, using the evidence, the data that you've created a sense of urgency, and then creating a broad vision. And with that broad vision, begin to, using your powerful coalition, develop action plans with measurable outcomes. And you're going to begin to communicate that vision. You're going to begin to communicate the action plan with measurable outcomes. That's all part of that third step. When we talk about engaging the organization, you're going to see communicate and market the vision. Here is where we crafted the vision and the strategic action items with measurable outcomes using our powerful coalition. Now we communicate and we market that. You can use emails, you can use vlogs, you can use a lot of type of systems to continually market and communicate your vision. And part of that is also empowering others to act on the vision. And you're going to empower not only those of your powerful coalition, but those involved in the change to look at ways to remove the obstacles that may be out there, to look at other changes to systems that can occur, and to try to bring in new structures that may work. And in some areas, or I should say in some companies, through the change management process, when we empowered others to act on the vision, as we were communicating and marketing the change on a biweekly or monthly basis, we would give and congratulate those who were helping us in enacting the change, helping us to remove obstacles. And even sometimes you can provide financial incentives. The sixth step within the engagement part of Cotter also goes back to kind of the marketing. And there's a little marketing ploy that Cotter suggests, and that is to plan for and create short-term wins. And it's a great ploy. It's a great marketing scheme to win. So if your change plan is 15 steps, let's say it's 15 steps, and you've created measurable outcomes, along the way, you engineer wins. For example, at Kemper Insurance, when we were putting in a new commercial lines policy rating and policy writing automated system, where before we had done it manually, now we're going to enter information into the computer will spit out the policy, a copy to the insured, a copy to the agent, a copy to file. Short-term wins were our first commercial auto policy. We would talk about it and we would congratulate those who did it. That was a short-term win. Or our first workers' comp policy that came out of the system. Or our first general liability policy that came out of the system. So you would engineer, plan, and create short-term wins. And that's important because that is reinforcing the sense of urgency, it's reinforcing the vision, it's showing that you've empowered others to act on the vision, and it's showing that you're moving from the current state to the desirable state. And lastly, for Cotter, we have implement and sustain change. At this stage, if you've done the first 6 steps well, you now are close to your desirable state. Maybe you are there almost. You then have to work on consolidating and integrating the change, making sure that you've codified your procedures, making sure that if you have to change compensation structure because you're doing things differently, that's done. And then you institutionalize and you say, it's done. The change has ended. So these last 2 steps tend to go rather quickly, especially if you have planned for and executed the first 6 steps well. The consolidation and integration is important, sort of happens naturally up in here, and then institutionalizing is basically the leader saying, it's done. We're now at that point. And keep in mind, depending on the change could only take maybe a week, or the change could be a major change and take a quarter, maybe a half a year, or even 12 months. So much in this course for many of you who will be leaders is that has been absolutely critical. This change model is one of those points of criticality. Now that we understand change, let's take a look at a change at a very high level. In the case study of General Electric that has gone through changes at the CEO level. And as many of you know, General Electric is just a huge organization. And their CEO for many years, actually 20 years, you'll see, was Jack Welch. And many of you have probably heard of Jack Welch. And Jack Welch was the CEO of General Electric from 1981 to 2001, 20 years when he retired. To give you some perspective, and again, a measurable outcome, when Welch started, the market value, the worth of the company was $15 billion. When he left, the market value was $400 billion. And to give you perspective of how large a billion is, you'll see what is $1 billion? It's $1 million 1,000 times over. That's a lot of money. It's more money than we can actually understand. But look at what Welch did. And at the end of the day, that is how a CEO is judged. And throughout Welch's tenure, he maintained something that GE has always been very proud of, and that is fairly substantial dividends to shareholders. And keep that in mind because we're going to see that. When Welch retired, the board brought Jeffrey Immelt up to the CEO position. Immelt was a protege of Jack Welch. Immelt lasted for 15 years, from 2002 to 2017. You'll see under Immelt's tenure, market value went from $400 billion to $271 billion. Keep in mind there was a substantial recession in or during Immelt's tenure, 2008, so forth and so on, and there were some other minor recessions. Immelt didn't have as strong of an economy as a CEO that Welch did, but you'll see that there was some degradation in the market value. Immelt was replaced by John Flannery, another internal GE leader. So we had Welch, internal GE, Immelt, internal GE, and now Flannery. Flannery started in 2017. His overarching goals, he had a couple. You'll see this overarching goal: redefine the culture. Again, market value has gone down. Flannery wanted to correct that. And he felt the best way to do that was to redefine the culture. And a couple of major points. He was going to change out management and focus on cash, profitability, and growth. That second bullet's not unusual. Probably should be doing that all the time. And to say that you're going to do it now probably means or infers that it wasn't being done prior. Not a good thing to have to really state as a goal. But the change out of management was language that was very disturbing. And if you talk about trying to make a change and trying to deal with resistors, starting off with change out management is probably not a good idea, or to at least state it in such a manner, because you're going to need a powerful coalition to help you. Another overarching goal was to get back to basics, improve margins, and target $2 billion in cost reductions. Again, when you say cost reductions, Keep in mind, the largest cost in any organization is the human cost. So not only are you changing out management, now you're going to be changing out others, those other non-management folks. So Flannery's overarching goals are now going through General Electric, and the resistors, the resistance is percolating. And next is to reduce complexity, focus on most profitable assets, and sell off about $20 billion in assets in 12 months. Again, when you sell off an asset, a corporate holding, that means people. And usually when another entity buys an asset from an organization, folks are going to lose their jobs in the process. So a lot of individuals are looking at Flannery saying, my gosh, he's going to change out management. He's going to change out non-management. He's going to sell parts of the company. Yeah, they're not the most profitable parts. He's going to sell them off. Do I want to be part of a shrinking organization? So Flannery, in terms of building a powerful coalition, in terms of selling his vision, his strategy, probably didn't do that good of a job. And in fact, John Flannery did not last too long, from 2017 to October 2018. And only the second time in the company's history, and it occurred under Flannery, that no dividend was given to shareholders. And you will see in Flannery's short tenure, the market value crashed. I have no other way to say it. From $271 billion to $80 billion. And just a scary cash. And remember, cash is king. Cash went from $14 billion to $8 billion. John Flannery, internal GE, had some nice ideas, or did he? Tried to go about change, but did he use, or was he effective at some of the concepts in Kotter's change model? Flannery was replaced by Larry Culp, and for the first time in the history of General Electric, the company went outside, and they recruited Larry Culp from the industrial conglomerate Danaher. Culp simplified things. He said that he basically would have two goals for the organization. He wanted leaders, and everyone for that matter, to just concentrate on the daily management of the business. Get into the weeds. And implement lean initiatives. When we talk about lean initiatives, we're not talking about changing out management. We're not talking about changing out non-management. When we talk about lean initiatives, we're looking at change and developing better ways of doing things. Saving dollars here, saving dollars there. And by doing that, we improve margins. By doing that, we improve our cash. By doing that, we improve profitability. So Culp went about his vision in a very different way than Flannery. He kept it simple. He tried to keep resistance at bay, said that everyone is responsible for the daily management of the business. Don't worry about the huge overarching goals. Manage the business daily and look at ways to improve, streamline, look at ways to become lean. Their current market value is $117 billion, up from when Flannery left it, $80 billion, and is trending up in the positive way. So again, Kotter's 8-step change model is a proven way to implement change. And Culp went about it beautifully. He simplified the approach. His powerful coalition brought in everyone, not just management, but all employees. Because when you talk about lean initiatives, that's a powerful coalition. That's expanding participation to everyone. And he communicated continually the measurable outcomes and how they have succeeded. So when we talk about change, always take a look at Kotter's change model. I hope you enjoyed my review of change and its importance. And as always, be safe, and I wish you well.